In this episode of Stop, Look, and Listen, we discuss the case of Wallace Wilder. He was killed during a wellness check by Pickens County, Alabama law enforcement in August 2019. The family is still awaiting answers in an attempt to seek justice.
So thank you for joining us here on Stop, Look, and Listen. I have two very special guests with me this week. We have Renota Harris, the niece of Wallace Wilder, and attorney Richard Rice, who is representing the family. How are you doing, Richard and Renota?
I'm good.
I'm doing well. Thank you for having us.
Sure. So I have Richard and Renota on Stop, Look, and Listen this week because Wallace Wilder was killed by law enforcement about a year ago, and the family is still seeking answers. So I wanted to provide this platform so everyone can familiarize themselves with the case and also assist in getting the word out. So before we get into the case, Renota, could you just tell us about your uncle, the man Wallace Wilder?
Well, we can separate the man from the mental illness. You know, we had such a loving person. Wallace was a family guy. You know, he loved his family. He kept us all together because he literally called everybody, most of us, almost every day, especially his siblings. That's the kind of person he was. He would do anything for any one of us. But, you know, he had his issues with mental illness. And that's one of the things I would like to do is kind of separate the man from the mental illness and let everybody know that this was a real human being, not just a man with mental illness.
Okay. So what did your uncle kind of do like for a living? And was he like the Papa Bear type figure, like amongst you and your relatives?
He was. Well, as what he did for a living, in his latter years, he was on Social Security disability because of his mental illness. Prior to that, I think he built tires. Right? Yeah, he built tires. I can remember him building tires at one time. I can remember, yeah, because I had to write help him write a paper or something one time regarding that job. But he was just a loving guy. He really was. I mean, he has 3 kids, 2 grandkids. And he was always the one known to give his last to those children, you know. And he was just a great father, great brother, great uncle. Worrisome because he loved us so much that it was annoying, if that make any sense, because he literally called us all the time, and the conversation wouldn't last like 2 minutes. He would say, "Hey, what are you doing?" And nothing. And he'll say, "What Chloe doing?" That's my daughter. She's 8. And that's the extent of the conversation. And well, tell Chloe I love her, and that's it. I mean, but sometimes, you know, he would call and I would have to stay on the phone with him for a long time when he was going through. But for the most part, those phone calls were just I love you phone calls.
So did he live by himself or?
He did. Okay. He did. He lived in Gordo alone.
Okay.
After he was divorced from his children's mom, he resided alone.
And that's Gordo, Alabama.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. So Attorney Rice, could you get into the events as you know it that unfolded on August 28th, 2019?
Right. So as you know, we discussed prior to the interview, you know, there's still more questions than we have answers. And, you know, I want to say thank you for providing, you know, lending us your platform to shed light onto this situation. The investigation is ongoing. Certainly Ms. Harris and her family have been, you know, following up with local law enforcement officials and also with the Attorney General's office to try to get more answers about specifically what happened to her uncle, to their family member and loved one. And as Ms. Harris stated, Mr. Wilder was, you know, diagnosed with schizophrenia, you know, for more than 2 decades. I mean, it's been known that he has had this diagnosis. He has, you know, relationship or familiarity with local law enforcement, in particular with Todd Hall, who we know to be one of the shooters involved in the shooting that caused the death of Mr. Wilder. So Todd Hall was formerly the police chief of Gordo prior to being appointed as the sheriff of Pickens County by Governor Ivey. and he served in that role as police chief for many years, and so he had an instance or opportunity to be well acquainted with Mr. Wilder. And as you stated, on August 28th of 2019, there was a call into to the sheriff's office, either directly to the sheriff or into the main office. That's one of the questions we have. And basically, it was reported that that there was noise coming from Mr. Wilder's apartment, and so there was a wellness check that was instituted. And we do know, again, that Sheriff Todd Hall was one of the responders. There were other law enforcement officials that responded. In particular, we have information that some of those folks were maybe correctional officers who worked inside the jail and not necessarily police officers that we would typically see out interacting with the public. And ultimately, Mr. Wilder was shot multiple times in the back in his own home. And we have been, reports show and the objective evidence show that the police used force to enter Mr. Wilder's home after they had already spoken with him to confirm that he wasn't having a medical crisis. He certainly was most likely having some type of mental health crisis at the time, but at that point, he wasn't a danger to anyone. It wasn't a danger to himself, that he had closed the door to his home and locked it, and that force was used to enter his home. And ultimately, he was shot multiple times in the back. Mr. Wilder didn't have any type of firearms in his home. No firearms were found on the scene, or no firearms were in his possession at the time of the shooting. So that's kind of a basic overview, that you have a mentally ill individual who was shot and killed in his own home by law enforcement with multiple gun wounds in his back. And I don't really want to try to speculate on too much more at this point, because those are the objective facts that we know. And we believe that that's enough information for these individuals to be removed from office. Todd Hall is still active duty, acting as sheriff, and we know that there was at least one other shooter involved, who also, as far as we know, is on active duty. His name has not been released, and that information hasn't been shared. And so that's where we are. That's what we know right now.
So let me backtrack for a minute. What usually happens during a wellness check? Are officers required to enter, the property when doing a wellness check, or can they just knock on the door? The person answers and sees that it's pretty calm, and they can go on about their business.
Well, no. The police don't have a right to enter your home, absolute right to enter your home in that situation. We certainly have, right to privacy in those situations. Domestic situations can manifest in so many different forms. And with Mr. Wilder, he was home alone. I think in some cases we have to, give officers some, discretion in determining when they need to use force to enter a home, especially if you had a situation where it's a domestic violence, abuse occurring, father against the child or parent against the child, or spouse on spouse abuse, and those types of situations where there is some type of probable cause that the police officer can articulate if there's some type of threat of harm or danger to the officer or to another person. If the officer has witnessed a crime and there's some type of a looting or something taking place, in those situations, maybe, it would be authorized for the officer to enter the home. But in this situation, when Mr. Wilder has a well-documented mental health history, and he's already come outside of his home and spoken to the police officers or to the deputies and confirmed that he's not having any type of medical crisis and not in need of any type of emergency care, and he chooses to walk back into his home and secure the lock and close it, then he would certainly have a right, to do so in that situation. And so that's one of the main questions we would have about is what was the probable cause, what was the basis to enter the home, and then certainly for an unarmed person to be shot in the back multiple times, and then obviously there's a lot of questions that arise in that regard. And you asked the question, what typically happens in a wellness check? Well, it really depends. It varies from district to district or municipality to municipality, because what we would be advocating for, obviously, is justice on behalf of the Wilder family, and to make sure that those people responsible are held accountable. But in addition to that, we are staunch advocates for defunding police to the extent that it allows for reallocation of resources, for specific training and hiring of professionals who have education and professional experience in dealing with mental health crises and know how to de-escalate situations, who are not bringing weapons into a situation in which weapons do not already exist. Just that very presence of bringing that type of, presence of guns and weapons into a situation with someone like that is irresponsible in a lot of ways, especially when, again, Mr. Wilder did not have any firearms in his home. And so what should happen is someone who has specific training, in some cases, a law enforcement official, we would advocate that it should be a non-law enforcement official, should come out and speak with the individual and provide mental health assistance. And that's what should happen with a wellness check. And typically what happens now is best case scenario, you may have a police officer who has specific training in addressing these type of issues. Or if somebody, you would think if that person had a personal familiarity with the individual, that they would have a better opportunity to communicate with them and de-escalate any type of potential threat of harm.
So I've spent 4 years working with young adults with mental illness, and it takes a lot of patience and skilled training. Did the Pickens County Police Department, do they have like a mandatory training to deal with individuals with a mental illness?
We're not aware of any type of training, and if so, it certainly wasn't displayed or demonstrated with this interaction. But we're not aware of any type of specific training that Pickens County would provide, and none of that information has been turned over to us. I mean, this case is in an active investigation right now with the Attorney General's office, and we intend to meet with them early next month in August to try to get some more answers to these questions that you're presenting.
Okay. So with the individual that made the 911 call, has she made any statements as far as to the reason behind making the call?
The day after Wallace was killed, she actually spoke with us personally. She did. She spoke with us, me, myself, my mom, and Wallace's daughter. Her reason was he was making noise. It was a lot of noise disturbance coming from his apartment. Never once did she say they felt threatened. Never once did she say she feared for his life. It was noise, simply noise. He lost his life because he was in his own home making noise.
Terrible. So could either one of you speak on the history of not just the Pickens County law enforcement, but also Sheriff Hall when it comes to interacting with the citizens? Do they have like a long storied history of like malpractice when it comes to dealing with some of the citizens in the area?
Go ahead.
They do. I was born and raised in Reform, so I'm well aware of Pickens County as a whole. Law enforcement. I mean, there have been murders at the jail. No one ever was held accountable for. There has been a couple of murders just out, police involved shooting just outside of the jail, and no one was ever held accounted for. And no real answers as to what happened in those cases. I know personally so many people that's registered sex offenders down there simply because they were dating outside of their race. It's a lot of things that is corrupt down there. The former sheriff David Abson, he was just indicted and sentenced a couple of months ago. He's now serving time in a federal prison. I don't know. I don't actually know where he is, but he was indicted on, I think, embezzlement charges or something like that. Not just him, but some more people were charged. So it has been a long history of corruption. And over the past 50 years, if you look back, it's only been, 3 different sheriffs.
Mm-hmm.
You have Todd Hall, you have David Abson, and you had this man named, I think his name was Lewis Coleman. And I can remember my grandmother telling stories about Lewis Coleman. I've heard that name all my life, Lewis Coleman. And he was the sheriff during, the era where my grandma was living. And it was just as corrupt then. Nothing has changed.
So I'm always hearing about the need to have officers and people in the judicial system that can relate to the people. Could you speak on the diversity or lack thereof amongst law enforcement within Pickens County?
There's a complete lack of diversity. I know, as far as the sheriff's, Garda Police Department, Reform Police Department, I think there are some minorities in Ellisville, maybe Carrollton, but the overall vast majority is they are Caucasian males. And that goes all the way to DAs, to judges, everybody. There's no diversity there.
So if this case goes to a criminal trial, do you think that the case can be held in Pickens County or nearby municipalities?
I do not. I do not. Richard, you want to speak more on that? But I personally don't think there's no way we can get a fair and just trial. And if this does go to trial, there's no way. I mean, because you're looking at the buddy system down there. Everybody knows everybody. They're friends. You think how friends are going to put him in jail? No. Those are his buddies.
Yeah, and I mean, I definitely respect Ms. Harris's opinion and perspective on this. I mean, she's an expert on, just the culture and just the way things have transpired in her city and her county. And, I want to, uplift her voice, but, also as an attorney, as a member of, a profession, a state bar, I think we have to be mindful of the history and the current conditions. And we also have to, have an expectation and an aspiration for more from the system than what is previously provided. And, that's my job to see that happens. And that's what I intend to do. You're speaking about a criminal prosecution. And so the Attorney General's office, the state Attorney General's office has taken the lead on this investigation. It's my understanding that the Federal Bureau of Investigation is involved as well, because you have a law enforcement officer who, obviously in an unauthorized use of force, of deadly force, that is an encroachment upon one's civil rights. And so that would, trigger the jurisdiction of federal authorities. And the Attorney General's office would have the legal authority to step in and investigate any criminal case in the state of Alabama, in particular one that involves law enforcement officer, taking the life of an unarmed, mentally ill man. And so I think that that's a positive sign that we have those two agencies and the Office of the Attorney General investigating this. I think that's very positive. And I have an expectation that they're going to do their job with integrity and, pursue justice on behalf of his family, just as they would expect if they were in Ms. Harris's position, they would expect law enforcement officials, elected officials to do their job with integrity, regardless of race, regardless of station or profession or whatever reputation that the officer involved has. I mean, that doesn't take away from, what the law specifically says when law enforcement has authority to use deadly force. And we don't believe that any type of basis has even been articulated from the sheriff or the other shooter involved, let alone do the facts support any type of, position that there was a reasonable basis to use deadly force in this situation. So we have an expectation that justice will be served on the criminal case. And to the extent that there is any type of, civil lawsuit, then we intend to see justice prevail on both of those matters.
So Renota, how do you and the family feel about the lack of information being provided? Like, from my understanding, there's a body cam that hasn't been released. The autopsy report hasn't been released. There's very little communication. And then to you, Attorney Rice, like, doesn't that sort of cripple your ability to get justice when so little information has been released?
For us, it's just a total disrespect for Wallace's life. Not only was his life not valued that particular day, it has trickled down, in my opinion. Not saying that they're not doing their job, not saying that they're not doing their due diligence to investigate this case properly, but I can't understand why would it take a whole year to give me something. You know, I don't know any more today than I knew August 28, 2019. And that's absurd. You know, at this point, we should know something. You know, I'm not, you know, when I have spoken with the attorney generals, you know, I let them know that I'm not trying to make myself nor my family, and Richard included, you know, we're not trying to take away the integrity of the case, but understand this is our loved one. And that's why I always try to paint Wallace as a human being, not just another statistic, not just another Black man that was killed by a cop, not just a mentally ill man. This man had family that loved him. And to this day, we don't have any closure. We have no idea what happened in that apartment that day.
Yeah, I mean, again, I agree with everything that Ms. Harris just said. I think that, you know, 12 months, almost 12 months now, exactly, is enough time. It's enough time for us to know what has transpired. It's enough time to sift through collect all the evidence, sift through it, process it, and reach a decision on whether or not you believe that you have sufficient evidence to present the case to a grand jury or just outright charge the responsible shooter. You know, I think there's enough time that has elapsed. I understand criminal procedure and that the attorney general, or in most cases it would be a district attorney, but in this case it's an attorney general, has discretion as to what evidence will be released when there is an ongoing investigation. If the investigation had already concluded on the criminal side, then we would be more aggressive in demanding the release of that video and other documentation. But the argument against the release is that if that information is released, then it sometime Poway can, you know, diminish the investigation or diminish the integrity of the investigation. And, you know, maybe in some limited circumstances that's true. But, you know, I don't really see how that's true here. I think that these types of cases where there's body camera video available, the public has a right to see it. And if the family does, of course, as well, but the general public needs to see this because we are giving these law enforcement officials authority to act over us, to govern us, to dictate how we move and interact in a society. And they need to be transparent. You know, we have to be able to have checks and balances at every level in our society in order to, you know, to have equity and to have fairness and to have justice. And to have a thriving democracy. And so when that information is concealed, then it deprives the voters, it deprives the citizens an opportunity to make informed decisions about who they elect as their next sheriff, who they allow to represent them, and what type of authority do you want to grant to police officers. And we need to know how they're using it. And if there is a mistake or an excessive force has occurred, then we all need to be seeking accountability, you know, for the sake of those most directly impacted, like Ms. Harris and her family, but also for the preservation of the integrity of our overall society and our system. And we've seen, you know, what type of folks call it unrest or uprisings that are occurring because people are frustrated. They've exhausted all of the remedies within the system, and none of those remedies have provided any meaningful justice. And therefore, people start to take their disagreements and their frustrations into the streets because that's the only remaining option that they can see. So I agree that the video should be released at this point. I think that there should be more transparency as to what actually has transpired, and enough time has elapsed to reach a decision on an indictment or at least a presentation of the case to a grand jury.
So I wanted to reiterate the fact that Sheriff Hall hasn't been charged. He's still on active duty, and the suspected second shooter hasn't been identified. Speak on how that fractures the trust, you know, between the community and the people that, you know, they're supposed to serve. Law enforcement.
Go ahead,
Richard.
Go ahead,
I mean, just in my opinion, not just, you know, they don't just owe the Wilder family an explanation. They owe the citizens of Pickens County a complete explanation, you know, as to what happened with their appointed sheriff. You know, he wasn't elected. He was appointed by, as Mr. Rice stated earlier, by Governor Ivey. He was appointed, but nevertheless, they have the absolute right. This, you know, the sheriff works for the people. You know, he works for the people. And you have every right to know what happened. And there's no way you know, they could, in my opinion, they could release something that where they don't jeopardize the integrity of the case. Pickens County has the right, and I always say this when we have meetings or rallies or protests. This is not just a Wilder issue. This is a community issue. This was your sheriff took a life, and when he goes, like it was a young girl mauled by a dog not too long ago, and he did an interview. Sheriff Paul, he did an interview. How do you not know that you're not blatantly interviewing a outright murderer? How did that little girl know if the person that came to assist her or her family know that the sheriff that came to assist them, is he a murderer? Just a blatant murderer. They have the right to know that, because else you wouldn't want to interact with any other known murderer they haven't served time for their crime. I wouldn't. I couldn't walk the street knowing, and everybody knowing that I took a life. I couldn't just walk the street and people that accept me. They would want me prosecuted, and the police are not above the law. And that's the thing with everything that transpired on that day. From what we know enough to know that it seems as if they just felt as though they were above the law, and right still now, with him still being on active duty and the second shooter not being identified. You hear rumors, being as Pickens County is small. You hear rumors as to who this person is and what he's doing now. These people are going on with their everyday lives as if nothing happened. That is absurd. And here we are still grieving over the loss of our loved one. We went through Christmas and the holidays without Wallace. And Taha was at home with his family, and the second shooter as well. That shouldn't be.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's a good question, certainly, in terms of a fractured relationship. I think, many communities, poor communities, in particular minority African-American communities, have a fractured relationship with law enforcement. And it's not because of a lack of respect for sacrifice or a lack of respect for the profession. It's just based on the history and the current situation. Right now in the state of Alabama, you have African Americans representing 25% of the general population, and yet we represent over 50% of the incarcerated population. And, I can rattle off a number of statistics that point to what I would call over-policing or hyper-policing in African American communities. And you touched on this earlier, where you talked about lack of representation in terms of making sure that we have representative elected officials, where the elected officials' demographics represent the demographics of the general population. We don't have that. And so I think for all of these reasons, we have a fractured relationship. And so if you are in that position where you're an elected official, district attorney, or an attorney general, then I think it's incumbent upon you, if you intend to represent everybody equally, then it's incumbent upon you to overcome that fractured relationship. And so, if you have a relationship with someone on a personal level and you make a mistake, then in order to remedy that, or if that person has had a negative experience with somebody else and you want to remedy that and make them whole again, then it calls for you to be more intentional about how you communicate and interact. You want to be, even more reliable. You want to be even more willing to communicate and to almost exaggerate your intention in such a way that is clearly perceived and that it can kind of break through those barriers that have naturally, been put up. That it's a defense mechanism. That's what we do. And so the relationship is fractured already. The individual players that are involved in this current scenario, which is a lot more than a scenario, but the individual players involved in it may not have created that total fractured relationship, but yet, we all have a responsibility, or at least an opportunity, to address it and try to amend it. And I think that the positive thing is that the case was removed from the local authorities and that the Attorney General is looking at it. I think that that's the best case scenario that we could have asked for, and that we have the FBI looking into it. I think we still have to be mindful of addressing the biases that exist at every level of law enforcement, the racial biases. That's not my personal opinion. I don't have a personal beef with any race or anything. I'm just speaking about statistics and the reality, the facts, the data. So that exists at every level. So it's up to people like Ms. Harris and, folks like myself, attorneys, professionals, to be to trust but verify, and to make sure that we're involved and engaged at every step in the investigation to make sure that it's moving along. And that's what we're intending to do. And we're trying to strike a balance between holding those officials' feet to the fire to keep the investigation moving, but also allowing space for the investigation to be thorough and to be completed with integrity. And that's what we expect. And we have a meeting with the Attorney General next week on the 6th of August. And we expect to have answers to all of these questions that are presented in terms of the name of the second shooter, the date as to when this case will be presented to a grand jury or if an indictment is forthcoming already. And once we have that information, I think we're going to be in a much better position to assess the integrity, the quality of this criminal investigation that has taken, like you stated earlier, almost 12 months.
Okay, so speak on the protest that was organized for Wallace Wilder, and then just the support of the community, diverse, Black and white, just marching and showing support to the family. Yeah. How did that make you feel, Renota?
It was a beautiful day. We've actually had two protests, but the protest in Carrollton, which was my first ever protest, I never in a million years thought I would be protesting or let alone organizing a protest involving a family member. But it was a beautiful day. We saw a rainbow of people out. We were supported by the community. We were supported by the mayor of Carrollton. We had his full support, and people came out, and people are hurt. The community is hurt by this, and they showed Wallace a lot of love that day. It was a very beautiful day. It was. We had great speakers. Richard, he actually was one of the keynote speakers that day, along with myself. It was a great day. I think it helped bring a lot of awareness to Wallace's case, because a lot of people, after we had that protest and it started to circulate on social media, it started picking up. People started, I got a lot of, tell me about your uncle, people want to interview me. So it did bring a lot of awareness to what happened to Wallace.
Yeah, and I found out about your uncle's case through my cousin, Tyshawn Gardner. I interviewed him, and I was asking him about the protest because I was in Alabama that weekend, and I was at a cousin's birthday party, and my aunt came from the protest, and she was like, yeah, Tyshawn was out there kind of on the front line. So I knew I was going to be interviewing him within another week or so. And I asked him about it, and then he brought up your uncle's case. So it's funny how, a story travels. So in light of like the George Floyds and the Breonna Taylors and the Ahmaud Arbery's, do you feel like your uncle's case is getting enough national attention?
No,
and how can we make that happen?
First of all, no, not at all. I don't even think it's getting enough local attention. And to be honest, I personally feel that local leaders, and when I mean all of them, local leaders, local public, whatever, they're putting more emphasis on cases that make national attention when you have something that happened right here in your own backyard that, in my opinion, is not receiving nowhere near as much attention as it should. Just if we could get Tuscaloosa, Pickens County, surrounding areas to pay this case some attention, we can make some leeway as to getting it, some national attention. But for some reason, it seems as if unless a case is national, people tend to kind of shy away from it. And we need to start sticking with a cause, not publicity. All of these cases, the same thing that happened to Breonna Taylor happened to Wallace Wilder. The exact same thing. But you hear Breonna Taylor's name each and every day. Breonna Taylor's name is a household name. Everybody knows her name. But the exact same thing happened to Wallace Wilder. Same thing. So my goal, and along with Richard, and as well as a couple of friends of mine, organizers Tiffany Daniels as well. Our goal is to get this to national attention, not for fame or anything like that, but it seems as though once a case have national attention on it, police and officials, they tend to when you know the world is watching you tend to do a little better. That's the case. Like Ahmaud Arbery. By the time we found out what happened to Ahmaud Arbery, that man had been dead for 2 months, and his killers were still walking the street. But once that case made national attention, his killers was arrested. Then they went back and arrested the guy that was recording. I do not feel that would have happened had it not made national attention.
Exactly. So before I let you both go, could you give us the website where we can find out more information about Wallace Wilder, and if there's a phone number to the Attorney General or petitions that can be signed to, just increase the awareness and help you all get justice?
Yes, we have a website, Justice for Wallace Wilder. On that website, you can find the numbers to the Attorney General's office that you can call. I'll repost it again today or later on when this interview airs, as well as we have a petition. Ebony Rice, she actually started a petition. Our goal is 2,500, and one of the demands on the petition is, for one, is to remove Todd Hall from office pending this investigation, because he should not, whether he is found guilty or not guilty, as of right now, he should not be serving in his capacity. He should not. So that's one of our demands. Our other demands will be, if this goes to trial, getting a change of venue. So, because we asked a question, we just put it out there on social media the other day, myself and along with another organizer, Rodney Hardy. We just put it out there. He asked the question: if this case make it to trial, do you think Wallace Wilder will receive a fair trial here in Pickens County? And everybody, so many people chimed in no. So that is another thing that we're petitioning, and you can find that information on Justice for Wallace Wilder Facebook page.
Yeah, those are all great resources, and definitely check out the Justice for Wallace Wilder Facebook page, and you can check out resultswithrichardrice.com and Results with Richard Rice Facebook page for updates as well. We have information posted there. If you want to contact the Attorney General's office, the phone number is 334-242-7300. And, we certainly encourage you to contact them, and voice your concerns as a concerned citizen about, what's happening with this investigation, that you want to see justice served. You can also contact elected officials in Pickens County, the Pickens County commissioners at 205-367-2020. We have upcoming elections, and we want to let those folks know that to the extent that they can remove Todd Hall from office, they should do it. If they can't, they should be leveraging their platform to bring awareness to these issues and make sure that the voters and the citizens are aware of the allegations against Todd Hall, and that he needs to be at least placed on administrative leave for the safety of residents. I don't want to call someone, call law enforcement out because I have an issue with the dog, or, maybe someone has locked their keys in the car, and you have somebody who has shown themselves to not be stable and to be prone to use excessive force, and then you introduce them into some low-level, non-violent type of situation, and they escalated, and we already have, this history in which we know that this person is prone to do that type of thing. So, like Ms. Harris said, this is about justice for Wallace Wilder, but it's also about all of the citizens in Pickens County. And as you talked about with the Breonna Taylors and all of these cases that are receiving national publicity, there's so many other victims that we don't hear about their cases. We don't hear their names, and their cases are just as important. And we need to all be mindful of what's happening in our backyard. And once we become aware of it, we should take action. Because if we don't take action, then we essentially give law enforcement a blank check, a clear slate to run rampant and do as they please without accountability. And we all know, the quote is, just still relevant today and is well known, is that, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And that's why we have checks and balances at every level within our system is to guard against, that inclination to abuse power and authority when it's granted to you. If it's granted for a limited purpose, within a limited type of situation, then we need to monitor that. It's up to us to police the police, if you will, in these type of situations. So we have a responsibility to speak out on behalf of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor. But if we're here in Alabama, in Pickens County and Jefferson County, Tuscaloosa County, take care of home first. Make sure that you are looking out for those around you, and then we can look for commonality and similarity on these national cases. So thanks again for giving us this platform. And, as this interview comes out, if we have additional information, like Ms. Harris said, we'll update you and provide you with updates, and we'll be sure to share your interview when it's released and post links to some of the pages that were described as well with additional information.
Well, Attorney Rice, first off, I want to thank you. I want to thank you for fighting for justice for our people. You could be doing a lot of other things, with your time and the knowledge you've accumulated. So we appreciate you. Renota, sorry for your loss, but I appreciate the strength you've shown throughout this, leading the protests, getting the word out, despite the lack of information. Justice will be served. So I thank you both for joining me this week on Stop, Look, and Listen. You can listen to our program on YouTube. The channel is GOB Radio Network TV, or you can catch us on gobradionetwork.com or catch us on Apple Music. And for Stop, Look, and Listen, this is LaTroy Gardner. See you next week.
Thank you for checking us out on YouTube. Be sure to subscribe for more great content. And don't forget to check us out on social media at GOB Radio Network.